Hello, Arizona, and welcome to this episode of Valley of the Sun Real Estate Show. I'm your host, Jayson Bates, the lender who lives in and is a part of your community. If you want to reach out to the show or to me, I would love to hear from you. Definitely love to hear from you. You can do so by visiting my website, www.valleyofthesunrealestateshow.com. From there, connect with me on any social media platform. Follow me on Twitter. That's kind of what I'm using nowadays for the most part, is Twitter. So, with that being said, if you are listening to this on iTunes, well, I really appreciate you choosing this podcast over all the other podcasts that are out there. This podcast is meant to inform you, the consumer, and help educate you on your choices when purchasing a home right here in the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona. Speaking of iTunes, I want to read the latest review here. And it is by Life's Cheerleader. And it says, great podcast, love your style, and like to see someone talking about loans and real estate. Great knowledge and great podcast to subscribe to for real estate industry. Keep up the great work. Patricia Love, Life's Cheerleader, the Rah Rah Realtor, Bellevue, Washington. Thank you, Patricia, for writing that review. I really do appreciate you taking time to do so. And a little backstory on Patricia. I met Patricia on a Blab, a live streaming platform of which that I'm doing more and more of. Blab, if you haven't checked it out, you need to check it out if you like live streaming. Great conversations on there, great people. It's Blab, blab.im. Check that out. You need a Twitter account to sign into it. But if you have that, check out that platform. Really great platform, and follow me on Blab. Okay, so with that being said, let's get into today's topic: seller concessions. What are they, and why do they matter when buying a home? What is the big hubbub about? Well, let's first define seller concessions. Seller concessions is an amount of money paid toward closing on your behalf. Generally, this money is used to pay for closing costs, but sellers occasionally can concede other items, especially if there's a bad carpet or any other kind of thing that may not be attractive to all buyers. Sometimes sellers will offer a concession to replace the carpet before you move in, have the property cleaned, whatever the case may be, roof replaced, whatever it may be. That's considered a seller concession as well. But for our purposes today, we're going to talk about seller concessions in the form of the seller paying your closing costs. Now, let's get right into this, because seller concessions, with the economy the way it is, it's already difficult enough to save for a down payment. Down payment is it's a big commitment, right? I mean, you got to take a certain amount of your budget, set it aside each and every month so that you can purchase a home. And only to find out, and down payment, we put so much stress on this down payment. Down payment. Well, there's closing costs that are associated with purchasing a mortgage as well. And these closing costs are not always accounted for from the buyer. And so what happens is buyers then ask for the seller to pay closing costs. So what does this mean for the seller? The seller has the option to help you get into your mortgage or into your loan in the form of concession or paying for your closing costs. Now, it's very important to note here that the seller, or anybody for that matter, cannot contribute toward your down payment. Super important. So seller concessions are just for closing costs only. And we'll get into lender concessions as well, because there is such a thing as lender concessions as well. But for the seller concessions, it's only to be used for closing costs. Now, closing costs, what are they? How much are they? What's a fair amount? As a rule of thumb, seller or closing costs are about 3% of your sales price. So why is this important? Well, seller concessions are limited. On a conventional loan, 3% is the max seller concessions that you can ask for and still obtain financing. That's the max that a seller can contribute toward your loan, and you obtain a conventional loan. Conventional loans are Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Now, if you're buying an investment property, 2% is the max that you can get from the seller to be used toward your closing costs. Now, vice on FHA or on a VA loan, it's up to 6% seller concessions. So what is this 6%, 3%? What is that, Jason? What are you talking about here? Well, it's 3% of the sales price. So if your sales price is $100,000, then the seller can contribute $3,000 towards your closing costs. Now, how does this affect your purchase? Let's talk about that for a minute. The seller, now as a buyer, you need to put yourself in the seller's shoes here a little bit, because the seller is looking at the property as an asset. And so by selling it to you, they expect to make a certain amount of profit. And when you come and make an offer that you want them to pay part of your closing costs or maybe all of your closing costs, then that cuts into their profit. That's where that money comes from. It comes out of the profit or the proceeds from the seller. And they're allocating that money to you, the buyer, so you can purchase their home. So with that being said, there are some limitations here on what needs to be done or how it needs to go down. Sellers cannot, and sellers need to be aware of this too. On the higher end properties, for example, a $300,000 loan, $400,000 loan, $500,000 home, $400,000 really, because it's Fannie Mae. Jumbo's a little bit higher than that. And jumbo you can do 3% seller concessions on jumbo as well, by the way. But on Fannie Mae, 3% on a $400,000 loan, 3% of that is for $12,000. So $12,000. Now, why is this important to the seller? Why should the seller even care? Well, if the sales price is $400,000, you ask for 3% seller concessions, which, by the way, is more than enough to cover your closing costs. If the seller increases their sales price to $412,000 to accommodate your request for the concessions at 3%, if the home doesn't appraise for that, let's say the home only appraises for $405,000. Now the seller may come back and say, okay, I'm only going to give you $5,000 worth of closing costs. Or maybe I won't give you any closing costs at all because the appraisal didn't come in high enough to cover what I want to get as profit from the proceeds of the home. So you as a buyer need to be prepared for that. And this is where having a good realtor on your behalf, advocating on your behalf, educating you, letting you know what the market will bear and whether or not there's wiggle room within that sales price to allow for the property to appraise for a higher amount is so vitally important, and why I've done podcasts on why you need a good realtor. Now, on the lower end properties, not such a big deal because on $100,000, 3% of $100,000 is $3,000. And absorbing $3,000 in the appraised value is much easier on the lower end. Not always, okay, but as a rule of thumb, much easier to absorb in the lower ends than it may be on the higher ends or higher end properties. So just keep that in mind when you're making an offer on a home, especially right now. Here we are in April 2016, heart of the buying season, if you will. And we're really at the beginning stages, if not the middle of our buying season here in Phoenix, Arizona. And so you're up against a lot of competition, especially in price ranges under $200,000 in Arizona. You're up against a lot of stiff competition, if you will. So you want to make your offer as presentable as possible, and making that offer without seller concessions lends it to be a more favorable offer to the seller than anything else. So just keep that in mind. Doesn't mean that you can't get an offer accepted with seller concessions. You can, especially with a great realtor who knows how to negotiate and knows how to approach that situation. But just be aware in a buyer's market that your seller concessions are negotiable. The seller may come back and say, okay, seller concessions, you're asking for 3%, I'm going to be willing to pay 1.5%. This leads me to the lender concession. What is a lender concession, Jason? Well, lender concessions are any overage that you get from your negotiation of the interest rate. So the CFPB has made this ruling that seller concessions are to be used first, then lender concessions are to be used after that. And if there's anything left over, then that money then is to be applied toward the principal. So what does that mean, Jason? So, and I know I'm asking myself a lot of questions right now, but I'm trying to kind of role play here a little bit so that I can articulate everything that, because it's kind of a little bit of a complicated, can get a little bit complicated when dealing with seller concessions. So lender concessions. When you lock in an interest rate, there is inevitably, not always, but 9 times out of 10, there are overages within that interest rate that can be then used to help pay or compensate your closing costs. So when you hear of all these no closing cost loans, mortgage loans out there, all that is the lender's paying your closing costs on your behalf. And really what it means to you is that you could get a better interest rate if you were to pay your own closing costs instead of having the lender pay your closing costs. So that's super important because you have, I don't want people to think that you can't negotiate the contract, and if you can't get the seller concessions, you need to move on to the next deal. No, if that's the house that checks all the boxes and that's really the house that you want, I always tell my clients, look, get what you can from the seller, and then whatever the seller can't make or can't pay or whatever you can't negotiate, I am willing to help and pay some of the difference or make up that difference so that you still get the house of your dreams. And so just think about trying to get the seller to pay closing costs on your behalf first and foremost, and then after which we can look at the interest rate, see when we lock it in, and see what kind of coverage I can supply through the interest rate and the overage in the interest rate. Now, I want to make a preface here too that some people say seller concessions are a bad thing because if we think back in 2010 with liar loans, for example, liar loans, stated income, people didn't have vested interest in the property, they didn't have money put in out of their own pocket, they put no money down. Aren't seller concessions kind of the same thing, especially when you're doing down payment assistance? So you have down payment assistance out there, and then you have seller concessions on top of that. You literally can get into a home for less than $500 out of your own pocket. So with that being said, there are some critics out there who say, hey, this is just not good for the industry, the overall health of the industry. I don't necessarily agree with that. I believe that the more homeowners there are, the stronger the economy. And so part of that is there are homeowners out there who have struggled, who have had difficult times in saving, the ability to save money. They're able to save maybe the down payment, but not the closing costs. Maybe they're able to save enough for the closing costs, but not the down payment. It does get a little bit, in a gray area when you have both, especially for the individuals who, get down payment assistance, get seller concessions, and they're living with mom and dad, not paying any rent, and they've got just a credit card. Okay, that's a high risk loan. But for the individuals who are paying rent right now, and the new house payment is less than what they're paying in rent, and they've shown the ability to save some money but can't afford to save all the money, well, that's not a high risk loan in my opinion. That's actually a pretty good loan to make. So, seller concessions, I see both sides of the coin, and they are certainly to be used for individuals who cannot afford to get. It's a tool, right? I mean, it's a tool that you can use through the negotiation of your contract to get the home of your dreams, and that's what this is all about. And sellers know this. Now, I will say from a lender's perspective, and when we look at the appraisal, the appraiser will make note of what the original list price of the home was. And this is important because we've seen over the past year here in Arizona, we've had sellers who have had unrealistic expectations as to the value of their home. And maybe that's the realtor's, the listing agent's fault. Maybe it's just the seller over expectations. Who knows? Who cares? But they try to sell the house at a high price. Then they reduce the price after 30 days because they're not getting any action, no interest in the property. Then they reduce it again another 30 days later, or maybe even sooner, 2 weeks later. Well, we see that trend on the appraisal, and the appraiser makes note of that. And by making note of that in the appraisal, we know what the property's not worth, right? So if we've had three price reductions, and then a buyer comes in, and the buyer says, okay, well, I want seller concessions. And then the seller says, okay, I'll give you seller concessions, but I'm going to bump my price to accommodate for those seller concessions. Well, we see that on the appraisal because we see the reduction. Now all of a sudden the increase because one buyer comes in. The appraiser's got to make justification as to why that's justified in increasing that price. Because if it was at that price before and it wasn't getting any action, they reduce it. Now they get some action, and now all of a sudden they're asking for seller concessions. Therefore, the price goes up. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So sometimes appraisers, if they can't justify it, they'll cut that value, which then gets you, the buyer, into a situation where you may have to renegotiate seller concessions or even come up with the money out of pocket for yourself. And the seller may not be willing to give you seller concessions in that scenario. And this is important for the seller too when negotiating. This isn't just the buyer, but the seller needs to be aware of these things too. Because if you're selling your home and you get an offer with seller concessions, you need to be aware that, okay, I'll give seller concessions, I'll just bump the price. And most people think, okay, well, no harm, no foul. I'm done. I don't really care. I'm still netting the same amount out of the property, which is true. But if an FHA appraisal is done on that property, that FHA appraisal is going to be on the books for quite some time. And so you're going to be stuck with that FHA appraisal, to which then you're not going to be able to set the price from there. So, it's important from the seller's perspective here too to consider these seller concessions and what it actually means. And this is why right now in Arizona, it's a seller's market for the most part, under $200,000. Above $200,000, it's more of a normalized market. In the jumbo world, it's probably more of a buyer's market at this point. But if you're trying to sell your home under $200,000, it is important. If you're making an offer on a home under $200,000, it is important to know where this comes from and where this money, how it's allocated, because it's not a rearranging of the shells, so to speak. But it is important to know this, because if things don't work out the way you intend for them to work out per the contract, you need to have a backup plan. And whether that's backing out of the contract, of which then you may be out of the cost of the appraisal, which nobody wants to pay for an appraisal and then not get the property, right? That's a waste of money. So just be aware of these seller concessions. Now, another thing on seller concessions that I want to point out here. Seller concessions can be used not only for closing costs, but they can also be used to buy down the interest rate, which technically is a closing cost, because if you're using it to buy down the interest rate, new home builders do this quite often. They offer incentives, seller incentives, landscaping, you name it. Maybe it's an elevation, maybe it's a lot premium, whatever. That's a seller concession. And it used to be before the crash, seller concession 6%, 3% would be used toward closing costs, because as again, 3% is the average for closing costs, to cover closing costs. And then the other 3% of that 6% seller concessions on an FHA or a VA loan would then be used to buy down the interest rate, therefore giving the buyer more purchasing power by reducing that interest rate. Now, right now in today's environment, interest rates are really, really low, look fantastic, historic lows right here in 2016. But I suspect as interest rates do creep up, there's going to be more and more pressure. Values of homes have gone up. There's more and more pressure that's going to squeeze that purchasing power. So I suspect we'll start to see more and more asking for higher seller concessions. So as a seller, you need to be aware of that. As a buyer, you need to be aware of that. And this is the purpose of this podcast, because I'm anticipating this being a problem, or not really a problem, but more of an occurrence in 2016, 2017. And so just being aware of these options, I think will help you with your negotiation of your sale of your home or the purchase of your home. So I hope that this was helpful, useful for you. As you know, this podcast is all about educating you, the consumer, about your rights, or what's out there, what's happening here in the Valley of the Sun. The fifth largest city in the country. There's a lot of real estate going on out there, and this podcast is there to help educate you. As I was doing my research on the podcast, there's really not a resource for consumers to go to learn about real estate or mortgages. And so that's the purpose of this podcast, is to help educate you, the consumer, so that you can make the best decision for you and your family. So with that being said, if you want to reach out to the show, please do so by visiting my website, www.valleyofthesunrealestateshow.com. From there, Connect with me on any social media platform. Call me, email me. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy the show, email me. You don't have to write the review, although if you are listening to this on iTunes, please do write that review, as it is one of the only ways that I have to help improve the show. Also share it with friends and family who are looking to purchase a home. And this podcast should be on Google Play now. Google Play is now accepting podcasts, so Google is just about everywhere. So Google Play, you can certainly check out the podcast on Google Play as well. So until next time, thank you for listening to this podcast over all the other podcasts, and I hope to see you out there shopping for a home very soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Jayson Bates, NMLS 220798, Equal Credit Opportunity Lender, Mortgage Banking License 1796. Sound effects provided by soundj.com.